getting the question to talk about Antwerp, there's many different projects I could choose to show. We have been quite busy in the city of Antwerp. We have built buildings, but we also did a lot of research, and yeah, somehow our engagement in the city is to a certain extent also an example of testifies of the type of vibrant city and proactive city it is. So I was doubting a bit in the beginning what to show, but I thought this project that I will show now, even if it's somehow in the beginning of our role in it, I thought it was a very good project to show, to talk about architecture and the city of Antwerp. I know the city as a very emblematic city, a very clear city. So personally, I'm from Brussels. I live in Brussels. I work in Brussels. And Brussels is a notoriously messy city, very confusing. I've always found Antwerp to be very clear somehow. I've also lived myself for a while in Antwerp, not too long, but also living there, I think you have a very clear sense of how the city is structured. And it's emblematic because it has a river, which you can see here in the background. It has very strong buildings, both old and new, the cathedral, the Palace of Justice, and it also has a very clear, according to me, city structure. And I wanted to talk about another emblematic space today, which is the space that you see here, which is in a way one of the most striking traffic junctions of Flanders. It sits on the south of the city center in Antwerp. And this picture is taken by Jan Kempenaars, who is a photographer, artistic photographer. And the fact that he chose to document this space like this is indeed because it talks about Antwerp, but it also talks about infrastructure in general. So the south of Antwerp has a traffic junction that is extremely large. It's known as the Spaghetti Junction. And it sits there since half a decade now. It's very beautiful, but also very somehow disturbing in some way because it occupies so much space. And even if visually it's very striking, the fact that there's a highway running almost through the city, a highway which is of a European scale, also says something about the multiple scales that the city embodies. It's also a global port. It's also indeed the connection from France to Holland, running almost through the city. And here you see a moment where the infrastructure connects to the city. The reason I wanted to show this project is because I think you can only tackle projects like this if you have a very strong architectural culture. And I think that's really what Antwerp has. And the space that you see here, the south of Antwerp, has been the let's say one of the spaces that in 1989 were looked at in an architectural competition, an international architectural competition, and it has been a very important moment in the history of Antwerp, but I also think in the history of urban design, because urbanism was not looked at as a kind of planning discourse, but really as a way how you could intervene and do a project on the city. So people like Toyo Ito, Sola Morales, Koolhaas have worked on this urban scale, but really through the lens of architecture and combining in that sense architecture and urbanism in the two directions at once. So to think about what you could do and how this would influence a policy rather than the other way around, where architecture just becomes a mere implementation of ideas or decisions that have been made before. Here, architecture is used as a tool to repurpose the city. And so I will look at the triangular space today, space of the south of Antwerp, at least the south of the inner city of Antwerp. The city today is much larger than that. There's a huge 20th century belt, and the highway that you see here circling the city is actually more cutting through the city. So this is the space that was looked at, and at that time it has been a very influential competition. But what is striking is that infrastructure is taken for granted, is seen as a fait accompli, as something that you cannot change. And the remnants of the infrastructure are filled in and given meaning, very interesting meaning. I think a project like this one of OMA was somehow trying to escape the boundaries that were given by the infrastructure and try to absorb the infrastructure in a metropolitan plan, a plan that would redefine what the relation to infrastructure is. And yeah, now we are here today, 30 years later. And the project that I will show today is just a part of a much longer process, just a part of a much wider initiative. So this initiative of the International Architecture Competition of '89 has also given rise to a very strong civil society action groups pleading for more quality in the city. And it's actually them who have started this new project, the citizens of Antwerp, to cover the ring of Antwerp and to somehow do something about the pollution that it brings and the impact such an infrastructure has on the city. So the citizens had the dream of capping the ring, covering it partly. So, but it stands, this kind of idea stands for a whole new notion of how infrastructure relates to the urban environment. And the way I understand it as a designer is that it's a question of how infrastructure can shape urban environments rather than just impose themselves on the urban environment. So rather than looking at the actual city fabric, the project that I will show today is a work in progress. We're in the preliminary design. It's designed with by a huge team of engineers, Tractebel Engineering, who are a very important partner. It's also in combination with an office from Holland, HNS, which are landscape designers coming from a Dutch tradition of seeing infrastructure and landscape as almost similar. And then we play a big part in designing the relation to the urban environment, 51-4E, and we also collaborate with Endeavour, which is a local group of sociologists and urbanists, really also assuring the link with the neighborhoods around and with the transition that Antwerp as a society is going through. So this is the project I will talk about. And I will show this image in a very blunt way because somehow it does the opposite of what the architectural projects of '89 did before. So rather than looking at the built fabric, we really look at how the infrastructure could be totally rethought and could become something that shapes an environment. And this becomes the part where it becomes difficult to explain, but basically what has happened, what will happen is a series of quite bold moves. So the highway infrastructure will shrink enormously, and rather than the highway tapping into the city, it's the city structure that will connect to the highway. So the highway will have one single point of interchange. And these two streets, this cross that you see crossing, is the extension of the space of the Leyen, which is, let's say, part of the 19th century structure of the city, and the space of the Single, which is somehow the idea of a parkway going along the interface between the old city, or the intramuros and the extramuros of the city. So that's one big move. And this move is very important because it liberates a lot of the other roads. For instance, the yellow road that you see here can suddenly be really quite, will be without cars, which will give an enormous boost to the public transport system. Also because there's a station here, Station South, which is one of the big stations, but is today not used as much as it could. And so moving this car infrastructure and shrinking it enormously also gives a lot of space to public transport to really take up a much bigger role. And then a third important thing is what you see here in green and gray is that the space that is left and which is not infrastructural will be treated as a park, will be treated as an accessible territory. So no longer the inaccessible traffic islands that you had before. And the two colors have to do with the fact that we actually install a new type of highway, which goes all along the ring, which is a bicycle highway. And what we have proposed in our competition proposal is that we treat this limit also as a civic space, so that within this extent of urban and land and green space, there would be a new boundary created, a new interface, which goes from the south all the way up to the Schelde, to the river, and which in that sense is a space that really could reconfigure the relationship between the inner city of the 19th century and the city of the 20th century belt. And so what we have done in that sense is that the light green space, we have called it the Buitenpark, which is the park outside of the city, which would be a more wild park, would be a more landscape park. And then the gray areas, gray-green areas that you see around, which would be more neighborhood parks. So by tracing this line, you somehow create a new civic infrastructure on top of the highway infrastructure. So it means that when you look at the bright yellow, this space would look like this. It would be like quite a wild place, close to the city. Of course, it will be noisy, but it will also have a lot of quality. There will be dams made to block the sound. The highway will shrink a lot. And so what you see here is a bicycle bridge going across the highway. And you also see that this dune landscape that was there initially will be enhanced and will take a life of its own. And then the bicycle path and the promenade I was talking about, this kind of huge arc, which is 3 kilometers long, that will make a kind of interface between the Buitenpark, the outdoors park, and the neighborhood parks. We will treat really as a place where it's not only about movement, but also about staying. And so the idea is that there would be what you see here in what we are now imagining as a concrete, polished concrete, a huge sidewalk or a huge curb, almost a curb that you can sit on, a curb that is on the scale of this 3 kilometer long promenade, and to which different urban spaces can attach. So here you can see the future of the campus on the south side of this space. And so you can see that it's both a place for movement going from Zuid all the way to the Schelde in this kind of 3 kilometer promenade, but also places to sit with shadow, with light, and somehow having this kind of almost feeling of sitting at the dike at the coast, overlooking the landscape, overlooking also the city panorama. So in that sense, it's a very challenging project, also a very peculiar project, because it somehow, for me, is quite a new way of restructuring the city, where landscape and infrastructure and urbanity are thought together, and where questions of ecology and ecological continuities and biodiversity are focused on as much as questions of mobility and how to reactivate the South Station, for instance. But also questions of covering mobility, like for instance, here you see on the south part, an existing tunnel that will be completely capped. And in that sense, will be a kind of strong infrastructural gesture that will be able to knit neighborhoods together again, or maybe together for the first time. So it's in that sense a project that is intervening in architectural space through infrastructure. So infrastructure is no longer just in the realms of administration and engineers, but it's a real collaboration between engineers, architects and designers, ecologists and citizens. In Antwerp, a lot of citizens. And this process is organized by the intendant, by Alexander Dove and his team, through a series of workshops, workbenches. If there's a problem arising, they organize scrum sessions where information is put together. And so slowly this integration is being made. And the plan that you see here is a kind of future plan which somehow holds many temporalities at once. So some things will be executed and other things will maybe only come in 10 years from now, like the reconfiguration of the campus on this site might be something that is an urban plan that will take many years to come. But what will be installed is the infrastructure that will be completely redone, this idea of the promenade, and of course the landscape that will be the first step in reorganizing the space. And so in that sense, places like the South Station, which feel like a very desolate places today, will be re-embedded into the city, also having new architectural developments, becoming public space. And this is an image of the canopy of the South Station, looking over the railway, looking over the highway, but also in the back, looking towards the Palace of Justice. So in that sense, really de-infrastructuring the space almost and making it urban, even if it has a very large scale. So here you see the parameter of the project, parameter of the project drawn as a kind of final image. But it's also very much, let's say, a totally new programmation of that space. Programmation from an ecological perspective, from a social perspective, for leisure, for work, for living. So this kind of programmation is a kind of work in progress, also done through consultation with many city administration, civil servants, also action groups. And so slowly we built a kind of idea of what these spaces could host and how they could, in that sense, and I think you see it very well here, how this kind of new arc could be kind of common space that both for the 20th century city and the 19th century city is something that they share and that can bridge also that infrastructure and the boundary that the ring creates, also in a mental way and in a physical way, so that you can really experience the space, and that both on a regional and on an urban scale, new program is added. And this program is really trying to weave together things that today seem quite disconnected. I will not go into the detail of this, but just to give you an idea, here in pink is drawn what exists, in purple is a kind of one scenario of what this future could bring. As I said, we're in a preliminary design, so we're testing out how buildings could relate to the park, how the park could be connected, how the water that you see here in blue is suddenly given a continuity also for biodiversity. And the same goes for on the south side of the 19th century city, where new squares are created, where the promenade somehow also gives a front side to the current backside of the Justice Palace, a building that was designed to have a front side on both sides. And so suddenly the promenade will there be a kind of balcony onto this outdoor park. And so this promenade also connects Nieuw Zuid as a development to the Brede Rode neighborhood. So it's a kind of new continuity, a new civic space that potentially ties the city together in a new way. Striking about the project is that the first intervention will be the infrastructural intervention. It is still a lot of infrastructure, but compared to the traffic junction that it was before, it's an infrastructure that caters to many different users at once. So it's not only geared for the car, but it has bicycle infrastructure, it has pedestrian infrastructure for buses and trams. And so it's in that sense a diverse infrastructure project, if I could call it like that, which is a significant investment, but it's really an investment that would prepare the space around it for a redevelopment of the city within the boundary of the city, like densifying, but also giving new spaces for the neighborhoods around it. So in that sense, it's a really big investment, but with a strong outlook on the future. And with this, I think this is maybe giving enough of a sense of what the project will be about. This is the last image I will show, where you see the Palace of Justice with a new front side, the Konijnenwei, which is there today, the rabbit field, which is largely reused and reintegrated in the plan. And so it's for me a very exciting project to work on and to share. I think it says something about the ambition the city has projected onto itself, and which it also, I hope, will manage to realize. Thank you very much.
At Brickworks Vande Moortel, we make high-quality bricks, slips and clay pavers in unique colors and sizes. With sustainability as one of our key values, we created a brand new high-end brick lab, allowing us to innovate in an eco-friendly way in the various parts of our company and the building solutions we provide. Building further on the sustainable initiatives we already had, such as maximum transport by boats reducing transport emissions, minimizing production waste and reusing it in the production process, and our ecological brick sizes, our new building runs on solar energy, parking spaces are water permeable, and we planted more than 200 trees. With the Green Deal in mind, we believe in ecological and circular building solutions which meet the highest design standards of today. All this without losing our passion that we would love to share with you.